My son sat at the long oak table during the reading of the will, arms folded, his lips curled in that smug little grin I'd seen too many times before. He was certain I'd leave empty-handed, certain that his mother's $34 million fortune would slip right past me, as if I'd been erased from her story. He was already imagining the life he'd live without me in it. But then the lawyer read a single line. Just one. And in that moment, the grin on Dustin's face collapsed. His whole body shook as he erupted, screaming so loud the paneled walls trembled. But let me take you back. Because before that day, before that sentence tore open old wounds, my life was quieter, mundane even. The coffee cup slipped from my hand and shattered against the linoleum floor, scattering brown liquid and porcelain across the kitchen tiles. Mrs. Henderson's voice pierced the thin apartment wall like a blade. "Your damn sprinklers are drowning my begonias again, Jerry. Same fight, different morning." I dropped to my knees, towel in hand, mopping up the mess. 65 years old, and still cleaning up disasters, some mine, most not. The sprinkler system I'd installed last month had a faulty joint, spitting water into Eleanor Henderson's yard every third day like clockwork. I'd explained it to her, promised I was waiting on the plumber, but patience wasn't her gift. And Eleanor never whispered. The phone rang. I ignored it. I wanted silence, just for a minute, but it kept ringing, cutting through Eleanor's shouting about property values, bad neighbors, and the kind of tenants who ruined a street. By the fifth ring, I'd had enough. Tossing the damp towel into the sink, I answered. Jerry Flores speaking. Mr. Flores? This is Janet Morrison. Morrison Welsh and Associates, Cheyenne. Her voice was calm, too calm. That practiced tone I knew too well, professional sympathy. The kind you heard right before life knocked you off balance. I'm calling regarding Brianna Elizabeth Flores. My grip on the receiver tightened. Nobody had spoken her full name around me in 15 years. What about her? There was a pause, a faint intake of breath. Sir, I'm sorry to inform you. Mrs. Flores passed away Tuesday evening. The funeral will be this Friday, 2 o'clock, Riverside Memorial Chapel. The words hit harder than I expected, like a fist to the chest. My knees buckled as I lowered into the kitchen chair. Its familiar creak roared in the silence. Tuesday. That was 3 days ago. 3 days wasted on sprinklers and spilled coffee, while the woman I'd once promised forever to was lowered into the ground. Mr. Flores? Are you still there? I forced sound from my throat. Yes, I'm here. My voice felt strange, as if it belonged to someone else. How did you get this number? Your name was listed in her personal effects. Emergency contact. I understand you were previously married. 22 years together, 2 decades of building and breaking, reduced to 2 words on a legal form. Yes. Divorced in 2010. Understood. There will be a reading of the will after the service. You are named as a beneficiary. Your presence is expected. Beneficiary. The word echoed, hollow. Impossible. Brianna had built her empire long after we split. The small consulting firm she started during our marriage had grown into something I barely recognized, something I'd only glimpsed in headlines and business magazines. Why would she leave anything for me? Will you be attending, Mr. Flores? Through the kitchen window, I caught Eleanor Henderson inspecting her flowers, her hands on her hips, preparing for another confrontation. But her shouting felt muffled now, fading into some other world I no longer belonged to. The chapel, I repeated softly. Which one did you say? Riverside Memorial, Grand Avenue. Service at 2. Reception after. The will reading will be 4:30 downtown. I nodded, though she couldn't see. I'll be there. When the line went dead, I sat staring at the phone, as though it might ring again, undo everything, tell me she was alive after all. The coffee on the tiles had already dried into dark rings. But I couldn't move, couldn't scrub them away. Not when Brianna, stubborn, brilliant, impossible Brianna, was gone. The light through the kitchen window shifted, turning golden, catching dust motes in the air. They swirled like ghosts, like fragments of memories I'd fought to bury. Her name echoed in my head, Brianna Elizabeth Flores, every syllable dragging me backward through the years. And suddenly, I wasn't in my kitchen anymore. I was back in Murphy's diner, winter of 1987, snow falling thick against the glass. She was standing near the counter in a red wool coat, her voice clear and sharp as a blade. "You won't hire women as managers because we can't handle pressure?" That's the most ridiculous thing I've heard all week. I froze mid-bite, fork of apple pie suspended in the air. I turned, and there she was. Strong jaw, sharp cheekbones, dark hair catching the fluorescent light. Magnificent in her fury. I prayed the manager would keep arguing, just so I could hear her dismantle his ignorance piece by piece. "Ma'am, I didn't mean offense." "Of course you didn't. You just meant to discriminate." She pulled a card from her purse and slid it across the counter. "When you're ready to hire based on qualifications instead of tired excuses, call me." The bell above the door jingled as she left. And suddenly, the diner felt empty. Smaller. Like she'd carried the electricity out with her. I watched her step into a blue Honda Civic, carefully checking her mirrors twice before pulling onto the icy street. Careful, methodical, but never afraid to fight for what mattered. That was the first time I saw her, and nothing was ever the same again. "That one's trouble," the manager muttered, not even lowering his voice. The words floated over the half-empty diner like smoke. I stood, slid a $5 bill beside my half-eaten pie, and surprised myself with what I said next.
"No."
"That one's extraordinary." The counter was bare now, except for the card she'd left behind. Brianna Chun, business consultant. I stared at the print, memorizing every digit of the number. Slipping it into my pocket, I stepped outside into the February night. The wind cut through my coat, sharp and merciless, but it couldn't touch the heat I carried inside me. It took 3 days to build the courage. 3 days of pacing my apartment, rehearsing words that always sounded wrong. Finally, with my hands trembling, I dialed. She answered on the second ring. "Brianna Chen." I swallowed. "This is Jerry Flores. We haven't met, but I saw you at Murphy's Diner Friday night." Silence. Then a small pause, like she was weighing something. "Oh," she said finally, amusement in her tone. "The man with the apple pie. You defended my honor to the manager." "You heard that." I was outside, getting my gloves from the car. "I also noticed you left a generous tip." Her voice softened, warmed. I could hear the smile through the line. "So, Jerry Flores, what can I do for you?" I didn't let myself overthink. "Have dinner with me. Somewhere better than Murphy's." A longer pause. My pulse thundered. "Are you asking me on a date? Or do you need business consulting?" "Definitely a date. Though if you have advice on how to convince beautiful women to say yes, I could use the consultation." She laughed. A real laugh. Unrestrained, alive. Not the polite kind women give when they want to move on. This was different. "Saturday night," she said finally. "Romano's. 3rd Street. 7 o'clock. I arrived early, nerves buzzing. And then she walked in. The same red coat, but underneath, a black dress that stole the air from my lungs. We sat across from each other, and the hours disappeared. We talked about everything but business. Her childhood in California, my years at the power plant, the movies that shaped us, the books that stayed on our shelves. She listened like it mattered. She laughed at my story of flooding my apartment while fixing a faucet, and in that laugh, I knew. I was falling. 6 months later, I proposed in the same diner where we first met. Slid a ring across the counter where she'd once left her business card. "Marry me, Brianna Chen. Make me the luckiest man in Wyoming." She didn't even let me finish. Yes. Our wedding day glowed with September light, skies so clear they looked painted. She wore her grandmother's gown, carefully altered to her frame, and carried wildflowers we'd gathered that very morning. My hands shook slipping the ring onto her finger, but her whisper steadied me. Forever. I believed her with everything in me. Dustin was born 2 years later. A red-faced miracle, his cry filling the sterile hospital room with purpose. I watched Brianna cradle him, fierce and tender at the same time, and thought, this is it. This is everything. But even then, while she held our son like the world began and ended in that moment, her eyes flickered to a business magazine left on the nightstand. Just for a second. But I noticed. As Dustin grew, those seconds stretched into hours. At 7, Brianna bought him a computer, worth more than my monthly paycheck. Not a toy. A real machine. He needs to understand technology, she said, watching him navigate programs I didn't even recognize. The future belongs to kids who think digitally. I suggested teaching him to fish instead. She laughed, but the sound had no warmth. By then, we'd moved to Hillcrest Avenue. A house with 3 bathrooms, polished floors, and a kitchen island larger than the living room of our old apartment. Brianna's consulting firm had secured a massive mining contract, and money poured in like water from a broken pipe. Suddenly, we had a housekeeper. A fridge that spit ice through the door. Dustin's bedroom looked like the showroom of a toy store. Isn't this wonderful? Brianna asked one evening, motioning proudly at our new dining room. Crystal chandelier glittering, a table that could seat 12. We can finally entertain properly. I miss the old table. The scarred wood. The dents from Dustin's crayons. The coffee stains from our late-night talks. This new one was flawless. Too flawless. It showed every fingerprint. Demanded coasters and rules. And soon, the guests came. Business associates. Clients. Couples with expensive suits and carefully rehearsed laughter. Their talk revolved around markets and investments, words I didn't understand. I wore my best shirt and tried, but I felt like a foreigner in my own home. Jerry works at the power plant, Brianna would say when asked. But her voice carried something new. Not pride. An apology. As though my life's work needed an excuse. Meanwhile, Dustin thrived. At 10, he talked programming with her colleagues. At 12, he critiqued wine at restaurants I couldn't afford without Brianna. At 14, he rolled his eyes when I suggested camping trips. He preferred business conferences in Denver, Salt Lake City. Dad doesn't understand. He'd sigh, dismissive. Like I was some relic of a world that no longer mattered. The first real fight came on his 15th birthday. Brianna planned an event that looked like a corporate gala. Caterers, entertainers, guest lists full of clients and their polished children. I wanted a barbecue in the backyard. A few friends from school. Something simple. Something real. This is embarrassing, I told her the night before, watching servers assemble extravagant flower arrangements. He's 15, not 50. She didn't even look up. He's growing up in a different world than we did, Jerry. She adjusted a centerpiece with the same precision she used in contract negotiations. These connections matter, Brianna told me that night. These relationships will shape his future. What about just being a kid? I asked. My voice cracked, softer than I wanted it to be. She turned to face me, and for the first time in years, the warmth I'd once known in her eyes was gone, replaced by something harder, colder, calculation. Being just a kid is a luxury we can't afford to give him. The world is competitive, Jerry. Either we prepare him to win, or we prepare him to lose. Her words clung to me. I thought about my own 15th birthday. A fishing trip with my father. A cake baked by my mother, presents wrapped in newspaper comics. Simple. Imperfect. Beautiful. It was enough. It was everything. By Brianna's standards, Dustin's party was flawless. Catered food, music, polished guests. He dazzled the adults, slipped easily into their conversations, and unwrapped gifts that screamed wealth, designer jackets, a mountain bike worth more than my first car, even a laptop computer. Everyone called him charming. Everyone said he had a bright future. But then I caught him by the pool, standing alone, his shoulders tight. His eyes had that faraway look, like he didn't belong in the middle of all the glitter. You okay, buddy? I asked. He straightened instantly, mask sliding back into place. Of course. Why wouldn't I be? His voice carried that breezy confidence Brianna had been coaching into him. But for a moment, just one flicker, I saw the little boy underneath. Lost. Confused. Still searching for a childhood he was never allowed to have. And it broke me. That night marked the beginning of the end. I didn't see it then. But looking back, that was the line we crossed. After that came 10 years of slow-motion collapse. A landslide I could see from the bottom of the mountain. Inevitable, destructive, impossible to stop. Brianna's business consumed her. Piece by piece. Weekend dinners turned into conference calls. Vacations vanished, erased by urgent client needs. Dustin's school events always competed with board meetings, and the board meetings always won. When I protested, her answer was always the same. You don't understand the pressure I'm under. This business supports our lifestyle. Someone has to make the hard choices. But I did understand pressure. I lived it every day, making sure the power plant kept the grid alive, that homes and hospitals lit up when people flipped their switches. My pressure served the community. Hers served only herself. By the time Dustin finished high school, I hardly knew him anymore. Brianna had sculpted him in her image. Sharp, ambitious, ruthless. When I suggested he consider trade school as an option, he looked at me like I'd asked him to wear rags and plow a field. Dad, that's exactly the kind of thinking that's holding you back, he said. 17 years old, voice cool and dismissive. You settled for mediocrity. I won't make that mistake. The words landed like blows. Settled for mediocrity. As if 25 years of keeping the lights on, of being steady, dependable, present, meant nothing. As if being a father who stayed was shameful. College only widened the distance. He chose business school, Brianna's alma mater, of course, and came home during holidays filled with jargon about markets and optimization, his eyes scanning our home like it was beneath him. You could do more, Dad, he told me once, the disappointment heavy in his voice. Mom started with nothing and built an empire. You've had the same job for 20 years. Some things matter more than money, I said. But he'd already stopped listening. The breaking point came his senior year. Brianna was buried in some massive acquisition deal, working 100-hour weeks. I kept the house running, groceries, laundry, the small things no one noticed until they stopped. Then she missed Dustin's graduation. A client emergency. I couldn't hold it in any longer. This is enough, Brianna. Family has to come first sometimes. She stood in our kitchen at midnight, granite countertops gleaming like a showroom, her business suit still sharp, her phone glowing in her hand. Don't you dare lecture me about priorities, she snapped, eyes never leaving the screen. Everything we have, everything Dustin's achieved, exists because of my work. And what about everything we've lost? I asked. She looked up then, genuinely puzzled. Like what? Like us. Like being a family instead of a corporation. She studied me for a long moment, and in her silence, I saw the truth. We weren't a family anymore. We were a business arrangement past its expiration date. I had no idea why she remembered my name in her will. The 3 days between Janet Morrison's call and the funeral blurred together, suspended in a fog I couldn't shake. I scrubbed my apartment twice. The floors gleamed. The air smelled faintly of lemon cleaner. I pressed my one good suit until the creases stood sharp, rehearsed conversations in the mirror that I knew would never happen. Each morning I thought about not going. Each night I decided I had to. No matter what it cost me, I owed her that much. Friday morning came gray and cold, Wyoming weather in May, half winter, half spring, undecided. I stood in the bathroom, pulling a tight against my throat, one I hadn't touched in years. The reflection stared back, older than the man I felt inside. Silver where there used to be brown. Lines that told a map of disappointments, quiet sacrifices, things lost without fanfare. I wondered what Brianna would see if she looked at me now. The drive to Riverside Memorial Chapel cut through Rock Springs like a history lesson. My worn-down apartment complex gave way to neat rows of middle-class homes, then to the manicured lawns and stone facades of Brianna's people, the world she'd fought for, built, chosen over me. The chapel stood on a hill, Gothic and permanent, towering above the town like a monument to her victory. The circular drive overflowed with wealth. Mercedes, BMWs, Teslas, cars worth more than I'd earned in my best year. I pulled my 15-year-old Honda between a Lexus and a Cadillac, the paint chipped, the engine sighing as it shut down. I felt like an intruder sneaking into a celebration I hadn't been invited to. Inside, the air carried the weight of money. Mahogany pews, stained glass windows glowing with biblical light, flowers arranged with calculated elegance. At least 200 people filled the space, their voices weaving a low hum, half mourning, half networking. Deals whispered in hushed tones, handshakes exchanged under the cover of grief. Faces drifted through the crowd. A few I recognized from the business dinners Brianna used to drag me to, evenings where I sat stiff in a suit, trying to smile through conversations about markets and mergers. But most were strangers from her world after me. I slid into a back pew, hoping invisibility might protect me. But whispers spread. Her ex-husband. Can you believe he came? After what he put her through, stories grow legs when no one corrects them. Over the years, I had become the villain. The man who clipped the wings of a brilliant woman. The anchor that nearly drowned her greatness. I'd stopped fighting those stories long ago. People needed their villains. Then I heard it. Dad. The word cut through the chapel like a blade. I looked up.
Dustin.
Striding down the aisle, face tight, disbelief etched in every line. At 37, he was Brianna's reflection, sharp cheekbones, commanding presence. The suit on his back probably cost more than my car. His watch flashed under the lights. His haircut was surgical. Confidence radiated from him like heat off asphalt. What are you doing here? His voice carried across the chapel, slicing the murmurs into silence. I rose slowly, my knees stiff, my chest heavy. I came to pay my respects. You lost that right 15 years ago. He closed the distance, and I caught the smell of his cologne. Expensive, sharp, designed to dominate a room. She wouldn't want you here. Maybe not, I admitted. But I needed to be here. For what? To ease your conscience? To put on a show for people who already know what kind of husband you were? The room held its breath. 200 eyes locked on us, hungry for spectacle. Judgment pressed in like a familiar fog. But this time, I felt different. I had nothing left to lose. I'm not here to cause trouble, Dustin, I said, my voice steady. I'll sit in the back. I won't speak to anyone. When it's over, I'll leave. You'll leave now. His voice rose, feeding the crowd's appetite. A few nodded. Someone muttered approval. You embarrassed her enough when she was alive, he said. Don't insult her memory by pretending grief now. I stood firm, meeting his eyes. The air vibrated with anticipation. Someone coughed. A phone buzzed against wood. Before I could speak, Dustin turned, raising his voice to the mourners, the way a prosecutor addresses a jury. I apologize for this disruption. My father seems to have forgotten that divorce means you're no longer family. His hand gestured toward me, casual and dismissive, like swatting at an insect. Heads nodded. Whispers rose. My cheeks burned, but I forced myself still. For those who don't know, Dustin continued, warming to his role. This is Jerry Flores, the man who spent 22 years holding back one of the most brilliant women this town ever produced. While my mother built an empire, he was content to punch a time clock and complain about her ambition. Dustin, that's enough, I said, harder than I meant to. Is it? He pivoted back to the audience, his voice sharp with conviction. Because maybe these people deserve to hear why he's really here. He took half her assets in the divorce, despite contributing nothing. Then, he spent 15 years acting like the victim while she built something magnificent. Murmurs swelled. Agreement. I scanned the faces, neighbors, old friends. People who once shared backyard barbecues with us, who once sat at our table. None of them met my eyes. She supported him for years. Dustin pressed on. While he refused to grow, refused to take risks, refused to be the partner she deserved. And now that she's gone, he shows up expecting sympathy? Dustin's words cracked through the chapel like thunder. Expecting to be treated like he mattered in her life? Every sentence landed like a fist. Not because they were entirely false, but because they stripped away 22 years of marriage, grinding it down to a single, cruel headline: failure. I thought about speaking, about reminding them that life is never as simple as winners and losers, ambition and mediocrity. There had been love once. Fierce, complicated, imperfect love. But what was the point? These people had already chosen their story years ago. And in their story, I was the villain. My mother died building something that will outlast all of us, Dustin declared, his voice rising with the conviction of a preacher. She deserved a husband who lifted her higher, not one who tried to drag her down. The chapel went still. I stood under the weight of 200 eyes, each stare a verdict, each silence a sentence. Shame pushed against my ribs. A part of me wanted to walk out, vanish before the humiliation sank deeper. But another part, stronger, stubborn, refused. I had loved Brianna Chin more than anyone else on this earth. That love, whatever remained of it, deserved to stand for her final goodbye. "Are you finished?" I asked quietly. The words surprised him. For a flicker of a second, his confidence cracked. He had expected me to crumble, to shrink, but I didn't. "I loved your mother for 40 years, I said, my voice steady, carrying across the stillness. 22 of them as her husband, 18 more as a man who still wished her well, even after everything went wrong. I'm not here for recognition, not here for sympathy. I'm here because once, long ago, we made promises, and I choose to honor that." Then I sat down, folded my hands, waited. The silence stretched until it snapped. Dustin froze mid-aisle, his face caught between fury and disbelief. He hadn't prepared for resistance. "Not from me. The service will begin in 5 minutes, a man at the front announced, the funeral director, trying to stitch order back together. Dustin turned, gave me one last glare sharp enough to cut, then slid into the front pew reserved for family. Whispers followed in his wake. The nerve of some people. Poor Dustin, having to endure this. He should have stayed home. But I stayed. I stayed through the eulogy that crowned Brianna as a visionary, through the stories of business partners who spoke of her brilliance as if it were scripture, through the hymns chosen to celebrate triumph and resilience. Each word felt like a knife, carving away the woman I'd known and replacing her with a symbol. When it was over, people filed forward, offering Dustin condolences as though he were the lone survivor of a tragedy. They passed me as if I were furniture. I waited until the chapel emptied before I reached for my jacket. "Mr. Flores?" The voice was polished, professional. I turned to see a man in a tailored suit approaching with the smooth confidence of someone used to being listened to. Mid-50s, lean, wire-rimmed glasses, leather briefcase in hand. He extended a hand.
Dan Morrison.
Morrison, Welsh and Associates. His grip was firm, his gaze direct. "I'm sorry for your loss. May I have a word?" "The service was very nice," I said, shaking his hand. Brianna would have appreciated it. She was very specific about her arrangements. He glanced around the emptying chapel, lowering his voice. "I need to speak with you and Dustin about Mrs. Flores's estate." Before I could respond, Dustin appeared at my side, slipping easily into charm. His grief fell away, replaced by businesslike focus.
"Dan?"
Finally. I was wondering when we'd get to the important part. "Of course, Dustin," Morrison said evenly. "Matters like these require care. I'd like both of you at my office for the reading of your mother's will." "Both of us." Dustin's eyebrows rose. His hand waved vaguely in my direction. "Is that necessary?" "He's not. Your father is specifically named," Morrison interrupted, his tone clipped. "His presence is required." I blinked. Named in the will? That didn't make sense. After everything, why would Brianna include me in anything? More likely some minor clause. Forgiving an old debt. Confirming I had no claim. "I don't think that's necessary," I said softly. It's probably just a formality. You don't need me there. Morrison's eyes locked on mine, steady, unyielding. I'm afraid we do, Mr. Flores. Mrs. Flores was very specific. Both of you must be present. Something in his voice carried weight. Not suggestion. Not request.
Command.
And suddenly I knew. This wasn't just formality. Dustin gave a little shrug, the kind of careless gesture only a man certain of his position could make. Annoyance flickered across his face, but confidence buried it just as quickly. Fine, he muttered. Let's get this over with. Then he glanced at me, impatience sharp in his eyes. Try not to make this harder than it already is. We walked 3 blocks to Dan Morrison's office, our silence broken only by his practiced small talk. Weather, turnout at the service, polite filler designed to mean nothing. The streets of downtown Rock Springs stretched around us, buildings scarred by decades of booms and busts, oil money rising and falling like the tides. Dan's office sat atop a restored Victorian, the kind of place that whispered power without shouting it. Inside, the air smelled of polished wood and old leather. Diplomas framed in mahogany lined the walls. Photographs showed Dan shaking hands with governors, judges, men who looked comfortable giving orders. It was the sort of office Brianna would have approved of, prestige without flash, tradition without dust. Please, Dan said, gesturing to 2 leather chairs in front of his desk. Dustin slid into the one closest to him, claiming territory without hesitation. I took the chair slightly off to the side, fitting for the role I seemed destined to play in these proceedings, present, but peripheral. Dan settled behind his desk, opened a thick file, and pulled out papers with the reverence of a priest handling scripture. Sunlight slanted through tall windows, catching in the dust that floated between us, tiny sparks suspended in air, like restless spirits. Before we begin, he said, adjusting his glasses, I want to extend my condolences once more. Brianna was not only a valued client, but a friend. Her passing is a loss to us all. Dustin nodded, solemn and controlled, every move measured for appearance. I said nothing. Words felt out of place in a room like this, when my connection to her had long been erased in everyone else's eyes. Dan lifted the first document. The sound of the stiff paper echoed in the quiet. This is the last will and testament of Brianna Elizabeth Flores, executed March 15, 2024. Properly witnessed under Wyoming law. This supersedes all previous versions. 14 months ago. My chest tightened. Why then? Had she known? Had something already begun unraveling inside her body that no one spoke of? The document confirms that Mrs. Flores was of sound mind and under no undue influence when she executed it. His tone carried the rhythm of ritual, the cadence of law stripped of emotion. Dustin leaned forward, his posture betraying anticipation. This was the moment he'd been waiting for, the passing of the torch, the official recognition of what he'd always believed was his rightful inheritance. Dan turned the page. His glasses caught the afternoon light, a brief flash across the lenses. I hereby make the following specific bequests and devises, he read. To my beloved son, Dustin Michael Flores, I leave the family home at 847 Hillcrest Avenue, along with all furnishings, artwork, and personal property contained therein. Dustin's lips curved into a satisfied smile. Hillcrest. A sprawling house with mountain views, marble counters, rooms big enough for guests to lose themselves in. A house worth close to $1 million. Dan continued. I also bequeath to Dustin the sum of $500,000 to be transferred from my primary investment account within 60 days of probate. $500,000. My pulse slowed as I watched Dustin's expression shift. The smile remained, but its edges frayed. He was pleased but calculating. $500,000 plus the house was a fortune, yes. But Brianna's empire was worth so much more. The real prize was still missing. Where was the company? That's generous, Dustin said, voice steady but thin. But what about her business interests? Flores Consulting. Dan's face didn't change. His voice remained even. I'll get to that. For now, I'm continuing with the specific bequests. Dustin's jaw tightened. His leg bounced once, then stilled. Dan, read on. The bequest to Dustin includes the following condition. He must remain employed with Flores Consulting Solutions for a minimum of 2 years following the date of this will's execution, or until such time as the company is sold or dissolved. The words hung in the air, sharp and heavy. Dustin froze. His confidence cracked, confusion breaking through. Conditions? His voice rose. What kind of conditions? And what do you mean sold? Who would sell the company? I'm only reading what your mother wrote, Dan said calmly. These are her words, not mine. The atmosphere in the room shifted. The casual arrogance Dustin had worn like armor began to slip. His fingers flexed against each other, restless, uncertain. And me, I leaned forward to spite myself. I'd promised to remain detached, a spectator. But suddenly, I felt something moving in the undercurrent of this moment. Something unexpected. Let me get this straight. Dustin's voice sharpened, the same jagged tone I'd heard in the chapel when he tried to put me on trial. His hands cut through the air as he spoke. I get the house. I get $500,000. But there are strings. And now you're saying something about the company being sold? That makes no sense. My mother would never sell her company. That was her life. Dan didn't answer right away. Instead, he removed his glasses and polished them slowly with a white cloth, every movement measured. It was less about cleaning and more about giving us a moment to absorb the words already spoken. When he finally slid the frames back on, his gaze drifted between Dustin and me, his expression unreadable, as if weighing how much truth we were ready to handle. Your mother's will, Dan said quietly, contains additional provisions. They address the rest of her estate, the company, her portfolio, and several significant holdings. Then let's hear them, Dustin snapped, his patience slipping. His voice carried the brittle edge of a man used to being in control, now realizing the ground beneath him might be shifting. I sat still, though unease prickled through me. Dan's careful wording, his somber tone. It reminded me of doctors preparing to deliver bad news, the kind of news that changes lives in a single sentence. Before I continue, Dan said, leaning back slightly in his chair, I need to emphasize something. These documents reflect Mrs. Flores's final and deliberate wishes. They were prepared after long consultation. She was absolutely clear about what she wanted. Silence thickened around us. The only sound was the ticking of an antique clock on his bookshelf, each second a hammer against my nerves. Dustin's face tightened. Alarm showed in his eyes. And I, sitting there wondering why Brianna had demanded my presence at all, felt my stomach clench. Dan turned to the third page. He scanned the lines quickly, then looked up, meeting my eyes for the first time since we'd arrived. There was something in his expression, sympathy, maybe, layered with professional duty. My chest tightened, bracing for the blow I didn't see coming. However, he said, voice heavy with weight, the will contains provisions regarding the bulk of Mrs. Flores's estate. Dustin leaned forward, his hands clamped on the armrests, as if ready to seize what he believed belonged to him. Finally, he muttered, let's hear it. The company. The investments.
Don's throat cleared.
He paused deliberately, the kind of pause lawyers use when they know what comes next will detonate like dynamite. To my former husband, Jerry Michael Flores, he read slowly, each syllable distinct, deliberate. I bequeath the sum of $33.5 million to be transferred from my primary investment accounts and securities portfolio. The words didn't land. They crashed. For a moment, I didn't breathe. My jaw went slack. My mind couldn't even hold the number. $33.5 million. The figure spun in my head like something out of fiction, detached from reality, as though it applied to some other man entirely. Not me, sitting in this leather chair in Rock Springs, Wyoming. There must be some mistake, I heard myself say, though my voice sounded hollow, foreign. Did you just say 33 million? 33.5, Dan corrected gently. His tone never wavered, but his eyes studied me carefully, like he was watching the blast radius of an explosion he'd anticipated. Beside me, Dustin's face drained of color. For a moment, he looked ghostly, then his cheeks flushed crimson, blood rushing back with fury. "What did you just say?" he demanded, voice breaking. Dan didn't stop. He pressed forward, dropping the second half of the bomb. "Additionally, I transferred to Jerry Flores controlling interest in Flores Consulting Solutions, including all subsidiary companies, real estate holdings, and business assets. This transfer includes 65% ownership of all corporate entities, as well as appointment as chairman of the board of directors." The room tilted sideways. My breath hitched, shallow and sharp. It felt as though gravity itself had turned on me. Controlling interest. 65%. Chairman. The empire Brianna had built. The empire that had cost us our marriage. The wealth that had left me feeling small for so long. She was giving it to me.
To me.
This can't be right. My voice was barely a whisper. There has to be some mistake in the paperwork. Dan took off his glasses again, cleaning them with that same maddening precision. "I assure you, Mr. Flores, there is no error. Every word of this will was reviewed by Mrs. Flores personally. She confirmed her intentions multiple times." Dustin erupted. He shot up so fast his chair slammed back into the wall. His eyes burned into me, wild with disbelief and rage. "This is impossible. She wouldn't, she couldn't." His voice cracked under the weight of it. Then he turned, his glare piercing me. "What did you do? How did you manipulate her?" "I didn't do anything," I stammered, still reeling. My head spun as if the air itself had thinned. "I haven't spoken to your mother in 15 years. "Bullshit." The word ripped out of him, a gunshot in the quiet office. "People don't just hand $33 million to their ex-husbands. You got to her. You tricked her when she was sick, when she wasn't thinking straight." Dan's voice cut through the storm, calm, but edged with authority. "I can assure you, Dustin, Mrs. Flores was of completely sound mind when she signed these documents," Dan said firmly, his tone cutting through the chaos. "She underwent a full competency evaluation, designed for one reason, to make sure no one could ever challenge this will in court." His words struck like cold steel. There would be no loopholes, no technicalities, no escape. I sat frozen in my chair, paralyzed, as if I were watching someone else's life play out on screen. The numbers. $33.5 million, controlling interest in a company that spanned multiple states, belonged in another world, one far from my own. My world was grocery bills and overdue repairs on a car that barely started in the winter. Her world, our world, once, was now colliding with mine in the most impossible way. But why? The question broke out of me, raw, trembling, from some deep cavern of disbelief I couldn't bury. Why would she do this?
Dan's movement slowed.
He gathered the stack of documents, aligning the edges with deliberate precision. His voice softened. Mrs. Flores anticipated that question. She left me specific instructions. She asked that I share a personal message with you after reading these provisions. Beside me, Dustin's face twisted.
Rage.
Betrayal. His entire body trembled with it. A personal message? She left him a message? She cuts me out of everything that matters, and he gets a heartfelt note. Dan's tone remained calm, measured, though I could see tension coiled in his jaw. You received a substantial inheritance, Dustin. $500,000 and a valuable property represent more than most people ever see in a lifetime. Compared to what he's getting? Dustin spat, pointing at me, his fingers shaking with fury. You're talking about hundreds of millions. The company alone is worth more than everything else combined. The room felt heavy, suffocating. The air pulsed with tension so thick I could taste it, metallic and bitter. My entire life had just shifted in a way I couldn't grasp. Everything I thought I knew about Brianna, her anger, her ambition, her coldness toward me, was unraveling. And all I could focus on was the unfathomable truth. She'd given it all to me. That's when Dustin broke. This is fraud. His voice cracked under the weight of rage. Criminal fraud. She was manipulated.
Coerced.
She wasn't in her right mind. He whirled toward me, eyes burning, his face a storm of fury and disbelief. You did this. You did something to her. There's no other explanation. I shrank back instinctively, overwhelmed by the force of his fury. Dustin, I swear to you, I had no contact with your mother. I didn't even know she was sick. Liar. His hand came down hard on Dan's desk, rattling pens and sending papers scattering like frightened birds. Nobody gives everything they built to a man who abandoned his family. To a man who couldn't even bother to call when she was dying. She didn't abandon anyone, I said softly, though my voice shook. Somewhere inside, I found the strength to steady it. Our marriage ended. But that doesn't mean. It means exactly that, he screamed. His voice cracked into something raw, almost a shriek. You walked away from us. You took your pathetic settlement and disappeared into your pathetic little life while she built an empire. And now you want me to believe she just handed it all over to you. Dan's voice sliced through the shouting, sharp with professional authority. Mr. Flores.
Dustin.
Control yourself. These are your mother's clearly stated wishes, executed with full legal authority. But Dustin was past hearing. He spun toward Dan, his eyes blazing red with fury. I want every document examined, every medical record, every psychiatric evaluation. I want to know every phone call this man had with my mother in the past 5 years. There were none, Dan replied evenly. Mrs. Flores was very clear when she explained her decision. Dustin's laugh was bitter, almost deranged. Explained her decision? So she did explain why she betrayed her only son to give everything to the man who destroyed her first marriage.
Dan nodded slowly.
She left a personal message for your father. The word father hit Dustin like a physical blow. For a heartbeat, I saw something break inside him. Pain, raw and unguarded, flickering in his eyes. My chest ached at the sight of it. But just as quickly, the fury returned, doubled in strength. He's not my father, Dustin snarled, his voice low and venomous. My father would have been there for her. He would have supported her dreams instead of dragging her down. He would have stood by her when the world doubted her. Then his glare turned back to me, seething with decades of resentment. You're nothing but a failure. A man too weak to handle being married to someone better than you. The words cut deep. They didn't hurt because they were lies. They hurt because there was truth in them. I had felt inadequate in those last years. I had struggled with her success. And yes, I was the one who couldn't adapt to the world she was creating. Maybe you're right, I said quietly. My voice felt small but steady. Maybe I wasn't the husband she deserved. But I never asked for this. I never expected this. Expected. His laugh was sharp, high, deranged. You orchestrated this. Somehow, someway, you found your way back in. You preyed on her when she was sick, when she was vulnerable, when she... That's enough, Dan snapped, his patience finally cracking. His voice cut like a gavel. Mrs. Flores was not sick. She was not vulnerable. She was more determined, more focused, more clear-minded than I've ever known her to be when she made these decisions. Dustin's voice faltered, breaking. Then why? Why would she do this to me? I was everything she wanted me to be. I worked for her company. I lived the life she planned for me. I became the son she wanted. I did everything she asked. And she still gave it all away. His pain pierced me. For the first time, through the haze of his rage, I saw the boy he once was, a boy who had spent his life trying to earn his mother's approval, only to watch her final act give that approval to someone else. She left a message, explaining her reasoning. Dan's voice softened, carrying a gravity that made the air heavy. Would you like me to read it? Dustin's hands trembled, his knuckles white, his body vibrating with barely contained fury and grief. A message? She couldn't look me in the eye and explain it, but she left him a message? Dan met his stare, calm but unyielding. The message was written for both of you. She asked me to share it only after the will was read. My throat felt dry, my voice coming out hoarse and unsteady. Maybe we should hear what she had to say. Dustin's eyes locked on mine, burning with venom. You don't get to decide anything here. You don't deserve any of this. His words sliced through me, but beneath the hatred, I caught something else in his eyes. Desperation. A son clawing for answers to the question that had just shattered his entire world. Why had his mother chosen me? Dan reached for another envelope, its surface marked with Brianna's handwriting, elegant, unmistakable. Personal message. Even seeing her script was enough to punch the air out of me. Dan lifted his hand, commanding silence, with the authority of a judge. Enough. Both of you. His voice cut like steel. Before this spirals further, I have something that explains everything. The sound of the manila envelope tearing open was deafening in the stillness. Dan pulled out several sheets of cream stationery, the kind Brianna always used. My chest tightened. She had prepared this moment. She had known the storm it would bring. Brianna asked me to read this after the will was announced, Dan said. These are her words. Dustin slumped into his chair, anger dimmed for the first time, replaced by an aching hunger to know. I sat rigid, afraid to hope, desperate for clarity that might give meaning to this impossible situation. Dan cleared his throat and began. My dearest Jerry, if you're hearing this, it means I'm gone. And you're probably sitting in Dan's office right now, wondering if the world has finally lost its mind. I can picture your face, the same one you made every time I rearranged the living room without telling you.
Confused.
Trying to hide your frustration. Trying to be polite. Despite everything, my lips twitched into the faintest smile. She remembered. She had captured me in a single, ordinary image. And suddenly, she felt alive in that room again. I know this inheritance is a shock. I know you're probably thinking there's been some mistake. That you don't deserve the money, the responsibility. But Jerry, you do. Every penny. Every part of it. And I'll tell you why. Dan paused, his eyes lifting from the page to glance at us both before continuing. I never stopped loving you. Not in our worst fights. Not during the divorce. Not in these 15 years of stubborn silence. I was angry with you for not understanding my ambition. But I was angrier at myself for choosing ambition over us. You begged me to find balance. You wanted to save us. But I was too proud, too afraid to listen. The words crashed into me, blow after blow. My chest ached. My eyes burned. And then the tears came, unbidden, unstoppable, as the weight of years of guilt cracked open, replaced with something I thought I'd never feel again. Absolution. Dan continued. Dustin. At the sound of his name, my son's head jerked up, his face pale, then flushed, torn between rage and longing. My brilliant, beautiful boy. I know you're furious. I know you're convinced your father manipulated me. But sweetheart, you're not ready for this inheritance. Not yet. You've lived in the shadow of my success. You've reaped its benefits without shouldering its burden. You've never had to build something from nothing. You've never had to make the sacrifices wealth demands. And worse, you've carried 15 years of hatred toward a good man for crimes he never committed. That's not true, Dustin whispered, but his voice cracked, weak, betraying his doubt. Dan's voice carried Brianna's words onward. Jerry taught me about character, about integrity, about strength that doesn't shout or prove itself through cruelty. I forgot those lessons when I chose money over marriage, but I never forgot the man who taught them to me. I was sobbing openly now, no longer ashamed. Every word was a stitch closing wounds I thought would never heal. Brianna's voice, through Dan, was restoring something inside me I thought was lost forever. Dustin, Dan read on, you have been given enough to live comfortably, enough to find out who you are without the crutch of unlimited wealth. Learn to build. Learn to value people over profit. Learn to forgive your father for being human, for being imperfect. Dustin made a sound, half growl, half wounded cry. Pain and fury tangled, impossible to separate. Jerry, Dan continued, you're inheriting more than money. You're inheriting the chance to do what I never could. To use wealth as a tool for good, not a weapon to prove superiority. I trust you because you never wanted this. Because I know you will never use it to harm others as I sometimes did." The letter went on, practical matters interwoven with her hopes for us both. But her meaning was already etched into our hearts. Brianna had chosen love over pride, character over entitlement, grace over bitterness. When Dan folded the pages and slid them back into the envelope, the silence that followed was crushing, sacred. I sat there, tears streaking my face, overwhelmed by the knowledge that Brianna had loved me, truly loved me, until her final breath. Dustin couldn't meet my eyes. He stared at the floor, his entire identity collapsing beneath the weight of her words. Everything he thought he knew about himself, about his mother, was gone. Dan placed the letter gently on the desk, his voice quiet but final. The moment was over. But nothing would ever be the same again. Dan held the envelope in his hand a moment longer before speaking. "She asked me to give this to you, Jerry. The original is yours to keep." I reached for it with trembling fingers, the paper heavier than it should have been. Inside was not just ink and words. It was the last conversation I would ever have with the woman who had defined my life with equal measures of beauty and pain. I pressed it to my chest, holding it there, as if by doing so I could keep her alive for one more breath. The silence in that office was suffocating. Dust seemed to hang in the air like the aftermath of an explosion. None of us spoke. The weight of Brianna's words pressed against me, against him, against the very walls. It wasn't just the money she had left behind. It was something far greater. She had restored my worth. She had given me back the part of myself I thought had died years ago. Dustin's voice finally broke the stillness.
Low.
Bitter. Empty. "This isn't over. I can contest this. Mental incapacity. Undue influence.
Fraud.
There are ways to challenge a will." I turned and looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time since we'd entered Dan's office. And I didn't see power. I didn't see control. I saw a man who had spent his whole life expecting the world to bend. A man who never understood that love could not be demanded, purchased, or inherited. Love had to be earned. "You could try," I said, my voice steady but soft. "But your mother was right, Dustin. You're not ready for this responsibility." His laugh was sharp, hollow like glass breaking. "And you are? You're nobody. A retired power plant worker. No business experience. No network. No clue what it takes to run a company worth hundreds of millions." For a split second, the old me wanted to agree with him. The Jerry who had carried inadequacy for 22 years. The Jerry who always believed he wasn't enough. But then Brianna's words cut through the noise. "You deserve every penny." "Maybe you're right," I said, rising slowly to my feet. "Maybe I don't know how to run a corporation. But I do know something your mother valued more than money, more than boardrooms, more than power." He sneered. "And what's that?" I looked him in the eye. "I know the difference between serving myself and serving others." For the briefest moment, something flickered across his face. Then it twisted back into rage. "This is insane."
She was sick.
She was old. She wasn't thinking clearly. Dan's voice cut through his words with the crispness of final judgment. "Your mother was 62 years old, Dustin. In perfect mental health. She underwent full psychological evaluation before executing these documents, specifically to protect against the kind of claims you're making." "Then why?" Dustin's voice cracked, raw, like a boy again. "Why would she do this to me?" I felt something stir inside me then. Compassion. Against all odds. Against all the anger and history. He was still my son. "She didn't do it to you, Dustin. She did it for you. She gave you a chance. A chance to discover who you are without hiding behind her fortune. I don't want that chance." The words tore from him like a confession he couldn't control. "I want what's mine." "What's yours," I answered, quiet but unwavering, "is $500,000. And a house worth nearly $1 million more. That's more than most people will ever see in their entire lives. What you thought you deserved was never yours to begin with."
He stared at me then.
Long, hard. and I saw something shift. He realized the man who had walked into this office beaten down by shame and ridicule was gone. In his place stood someone different. Someone who no longer begged for approval. You think you've won? His hands shook as he grabbed his coat. You think this makes you some kind of hero? No. I felt the truth settle deep in my bones. It makes me responsible. He froze at the door, shoulders hunched, suddenly small. This isn't finished. Yes, it is, I said, my voice steady, almost gentle. It ended the moment your mother made her choice. The only thing left is what you decide to do with the life she's given you. He said nothing more, just pulled the door shut behind him. The click was soft, but it echoed like a gunshot in the silence that followed. Dan exhaled, returning to his desk, shuffling papers. The sound of rustling documents felt almost foreign after what had just happened. There will be paperwork, Jerry. Accounts to transfer. Board meetings to arrange. The current management team is solid. They'll help guide you as you transition. I nodded, though my mind was still somewhere between grief and awe. Dan, can I ask you something? Of course. Did she really love me? Even after everything that went wrong? For the first time that day, Dan smiled. A real smile. Jerry, she never stopped talking about you. Not the divorce.
Not the mistakes.
She spoke about the man who showed her that success without character is nothing but expensive failure. The words lit something inside me. Something warm. Something alive. When I stepped out of that office, I was not the same man who had walked in. The afternoon sun was brighter. The air felt cleaner. The weight I had carried for 15 years was gone. In its place, responsibility, purpose, a company to learn, a future to shape. For the first time in 15 years, I felt worthy of the challenge. I realized justice was never about revenge, never about proving someone wrong. Justice was recognition. Recognition that character matters more than credentials. That patience outlasts entitlement. That love, real love, never dies. Brianna had seen that. She had seen me, and in her final act, she gave me the chance to prove her right.